Welcome to the first iteration of the Concourse Office Hours of 2021. I am Scott Forster. I'm a product manager on the Concourse team here in Toronto. This is also the first go around with this new iteration, doing it live on YouTube. Thanks to Taylor for the idea. We're hoping to do this every 2 weeks going forward. So we got some cool topics today. Alex is going to go over the new governance model for Concourse. And then after that, we're going to have Taylor do a walkthrough of some of the great new features you'll see in Concourse 7.0 and now 7.1 as well. So with that being said, I am going to pass it over to Alex to talk about the new governance model.
Cool. Thanks for the handoff, Scott. This is sort of a sneak peek of a governance model that I've been kind of like milling over for a while and just recently started actually putting it into code and writing out a document for the process. So the goal of a governance model is to provide a level playing field for anyone that wants to help make Concourse awesome. So we don't want it to feel like this is like a VMware project that's just sort of closed and all the decisions are made behind closed doors. We started improving that a long time ago by like moving on to GitHub and introducing the RFC process to like allow anyone to contribute to the roadmap. But we didn't really go to the next step, which is defining sort of the roles and ownership and like what process and who actually drives that and how do other people get involved with that process. As part of this, we're also hoping to automate as much as possible. We're writing an automation tool, so it makes sense to have as much of this be driven by code as we can. But yeah, I mentioned current status isn't announced yet in a blog post. I kind of just need to like put a bow on it and make it out there. But for now, I'm just showing it here. And it's actually live, so this is technically, I guess, a valid announcement. It's just not really formal yet. The repo, I'll just show it here real quick. Maybe I'll skim it. I'm not going to go over the README because that's going to be the presentation itself. But if you click around here, you should sort of get a sense of like how things are organized. There's a Teams directory. Everything's just YAML, surprise, surprise. And this is ultimately feeding into a Terraform configuration, which runs on every merge into master. We've basically automated our entire GitHub organization now, which is kind of neat. So now we can more easily archive a bunch, like for example, 19 repos were archived as part of this just because we didn't actually need them anymore. We can do things like automate labels across all of our repos to make sure they're all consistent, little things like that. But the gist of the model is there's a new concept called teams. This shouldn't be a big surprise. They just map one-to-one to GitHub teams. And now all repository ownership is determined by teams. So teams list which repositories they own. Let me zoom in on this actually. So core team, for example, owns the governance repo and the RFCs repo. Governance repo is kind of an exception because it's also owned by a community team and reviews are driven by the teams that are affected by PRs. So it's kind of a communal area. One key thing with this process is that ideally teams do not share ownership of repos. So the Concourse repo, for example, is exclusively owned by the maintainers team, and the RFCs repo is exclusively owned by the core team. We want each team to have a clear purpose and set of responsibilities. We don't want teams to have like too many responsibilities. We want that to be a sign that it should be sort of divided up. And teams are largely self-organizing and determine their own processes. This model is meant to be more than just sort of GitHub. This might even just be like teams that do external like event organization, things like that. So there's not much of a heavy-handed model here. It's largely deferred to teams to figure out their best way of operating. There is a sane default for decision making, so it suggests a 66% supermajority for anything that takes voting. Just seems like a sane default to prevent like tyranny from taking hold in newly formed teams. So the idea of tying teams to repositories and having teams be clearly scoped with a set of responsibilities is to encourage collaboration. So this is pretty much the same as today. We expect everything to be going through pull requests, but now that there are more explicit roles, there's like accountability and representation of like the many different facets that are necessary to make a product great. So for example, with the maintainers owning the Concourse repo, they're responsible for code base health and stability. With the core team owning the RFC's repo, they're responsible for sort of maintaining a holistic vision that's consistent with Concourse's design principles, which will actually be introduced as part of this change. So Concourse's design principles have never been written out, and now they will be, and that'll be sort of the manifesto behind the core team. And the way this division plays out, hopefully, is the core team can focus on the design principles and like building out like just a well-designed product, but engage with maintainers to make sure that we're just not like chucking proposals in that will make Concourse a burden to maintain. So we don't want to introduce features that introduce like a bunch of risk or just a high burden for the maintainers to do their job. And on the flip side, maintainers will work with the core team and they'll try to build up a roadmap that addresses all the user feedback and do it through proposals that align with design principles. And from there, things will just turn into like issues that anyone in the community can take action on. And the maintainers will be the ones reviewing those PRs to make sure that they maintain code base health, stability, best practices, things like that. Anyone can become a contributor. So if you submit a PR to this contributors subdirectory, that will automatically grant you membership to the Concourse GitHub organization, which that doesn't do much on its own. Being a member of the org doesn't give you access to any special repos. That's all really determined by team membership. But it will give you the contributors role in Discord, which lets you chat in the dev channel. It also lets you operate the pull request pipeline. So if you submit a PR and you're a contributor, then you can go in and like retrigger a build if there's a flake or something like that. But yeah, like I mentioned, this doesn't do much else on its own at the moment. If you have any neat ideas, I'm all ears, but the main goal of governance is to have everything be driven through teams. Anyone can ask to join a team. So you do this by just submitting a pull request that literally adds you to the list of members. I wouldn't expect to be able to just like join a team with no prior context or foundation of trust. But acceptance is entirely subjective. So if you just talk to someone on the team that you're trying to join, or even just build up a reputation through like contributions or just being in good standing with the community, you'll probably be accepted. One caveat is some teams are limited to VMware employees for now. We don't want this to be the case in the long run, but because Concourse is both like a product that we develop in the open, but we also directly package and ship it to customers, we need to sort of figure out internal like a mirror and a pipeline just to make sure that we're not shipping things that we don't really know what we're shipping. But once we have that, we plan to open up anyone to be able to join the maintainers team, for example. So if you look at the YAML file, there's like a giant to-do comment mentioning that right here. Anyone can create a team. So just like you can submit a PR to join a team, you can submit a PR to just create a new team. We want there to be many smaller teams rather than like a few monolithic teams, just because that encourages better focus and care paid to the many different facets of developing Concourse. Obviously, you'll probably need to recruit members first. I don't think it really makes sense to introduce a team that only has one member. And if there is any repository transfer that has to happen, for example, if you're introducing like a new team that breaks off from a other team, we'll obviously have to negotiate that with the team that you're breaking off from. As I mentioned, everything is self-service through pull requests. So the idea is all you need to do is submit a PR to this repo and it'll be terraformed and everything will just sort of happen. Pull request review depends on what part of the repo you're changing, but the README says who will review which PRs. And that's pretty much it. This is kind of humble beginnings. I'm not really used to solving human problems. Code is more familiar to me, but I'm hoping to start small with something that's not too gigantic and heavyweight, and just iterate as we need to, as we find gaps in this process or things that, yeah, maybe there were things that were too strongly encoded. I think that's it. If you have any feedback on this, feel free to chat with me in the dev channel in Discord. If you can't talk in there yet, feel free to submit a PR to add yourself as a contributor. And I think I'm handing it back over to Taylor.
Do a couple transition here.
Do you want me to stop my share?
Yeah, I'm changing that. Cool. There you go. And let's see. All right. Okay. Think we're at where I want to be as far as how the stream looks. But all right, so this section. So we want to talk about what's new in 7.0 and even in 7.1, though I guess 7.1 is a bit of a smaller release. But we want to talk about, what are the breaking changes? What are some of the new features? Especially because some of these are behind feature flags, and maybe not everyone has had a chance to actually try out some of these features. So we figure we'll go through them, explain them, and if we can, maybe we'll demo a couple of them. And yeah, we'll see how this goes. So I guess first thing, why was this a breaking change? So I guess there were two main things. The first one was running checks as builds. Actually, Alex, do you think you could succinctly describe this change? Because these are a lot of bullet points, and I'm not super familiar with it myself.
Yeah. This is mainly sort of driven by a desire for simplified internal architecture. We used to have sort of two different ways that things ran in Concourse. There was sort of a split of the code base for just running resource checks, and the rest of it was around running builds. And we were hoping to actually take the checking and be able to do it directly in a build. So that, for example, when you have a task that uses an image resource, we want to be able to represent that we're running a check in that build and then a get for the image. But we couldn't do that before because checks were completely tied to like a check object. So now everything is just builds. There's a few advantages and disadvantages to that. It's a bit heavier weight because now these things go through like the builds table, which has like more implications for the schema, but the trade-off is that everything that you used to be able to do with builds, you can now do with checks too. So if you wanted to abort a check for whatever reason, you can do that. If you wanted to view a checks build output in the UI, you can do that as well. And the web UI also just shows the build output directly. So yeah, now everything's just builds. So it's a bit simpler internally, a bit more flexible in the UI, and let us address some long-standing issues like having the task image fetching output be like directly embedded in the task step, which was kind of confusing. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, nice. So yeah, definitely simplifies things and makes it much easier to, I guess, just natively actually work with checks now, which is awesome. The other breaking change was very much a long-standing thing, something that was announced long ago, which is just removing the aggregate step. It's pretty easy to switch over to the in parallel step, which it was succeeded by. And it's pretty much, as far as anyone writing a pipeline is concerned, it's just a drop-in replacement. Just do find and replace for aggregate with in parallel, and you're good to go. But yeah, so those are the breaking changes, why we did a major bump there. But now let's get to the juicy new features. So I guess the bit of the headliner feature here was that we've been working on this containerd runtime for quite a while, and we got to a point where we decided to say like, hey, this is generally available. It's not the default. It will be the default at some point in the future. I don't think we've decided when that'll happen, but at some point, probably once we've seen that there's not as many bugs coming in for containerd, it'll probably be sometime around then, whenever that happens to be. But yeah, it's generally available. You can use it by just setting the runtime flag on your Concourse workers and just set it to containerd. Right now, this is still defaulting to Guardian. So really, if you don't want to try right now, then you don't have to, but we would love it if you did, because it is going to be the future for the Concourse runtime. And yeah, And obviously this huge block here is just explaining a bunch of garden flags and how to transition them over to container D. Not every garden flag, I think, transitioned over to container D, so there are a couple missing ones. So, this last bullet point here says it. If you rely on a garden config that's not yet supported by container D, just open an issue and let us know, because it'll be good for us to get feedback on on how we should continue developing the container D runtime here. And we've definitely gotten a lot of really good feedback so far. There's been a lot of people discovering bugs and such, which has been really great. So next one here, performing check image. Oh, I guess this still has to do with the checks as built and the little gear icon thing, right, Alex? I think that's what this one's describing. Yeah. Yeah, for anyone that's not super familiar, I think if you actually, I'm not sure which resource would show it because I think most of these are have their own resources. But essentially, there's a little gear icon it'll pop out, and then you'll see like a check and get step like that. So that's a nice little UI change to express those checks as builds. What else do we have going on here? Yeah, enforcing policy stuff, bunch of optimization of queries. Oh yeah, this one, allowing globs and groups. So this one from Andy Payne. So this is kind of a nice one. So before, if you use groups in your pipeline, you can know you're using groups because you'll see these sections up at the top that you can kind of flip through, and they're how you group sets of jobs together. So before it was just a very static list, right? And if you want to see your entire pipeline, you might have like one just called all, and you would see everything in one shot. But of course, if you added any jobs, you'd have to make sure that you added it to that group. I believe there was an error that would get printed out if you added a job but didn't add it to any group. I think Fly would show you an error in that case. But globs is kind of a nice way to, at minimum, have sort of a catch-all. So like the way this all one is defined is it's actually just like a little asterisk. So actually I thought this one is kind of a simple one to demo. So I started making this little demo pipeline over here just to kind of show y'all what that looks like. And this is that demo pipeline. And so if we added groups, so we could just add one group. Let's say just all, and then I forget the syntax for this exactly, so we can just look it up. So if we look for pipeline.groups, and then name, okay, and then jobs, yeah. Cool. So then if we say jobs, and then this is obviously just a list. So now you can do stuff like this, where you can just say, hey, show them all there. So let's see. So if I do some fly tci, dash tci, set pipeline, I think I had it there in my history. I gotta log in. Can do that real quick. And then did not find expected alphabetic numeric character. Hey, cool, we have an error. Why is this happening?
I think you might have to quote the asterisk.
Awesome. Thanks, Aiden. All right, let's give that a try. There you go. All right, so there, little tip for everybody already right off the bat. You have to quote it. And then I didn't even have to refresh because the UI is always refreshing. But yeah, so now there's like a default all group. There's only one group, so it becomes the default view. But if you were to then split this up into a bunch of things, then yeah, that all group would be showing everything. So yeah, that's globs. And I think like the release notes show, you can obviously do other stuff. So if you have some sort of naming pattern for your jobs, then you can use the glob to just quickly capture all of them instead of statically listing them all out. So that's kind of a nice little feature there that could be easy to miss, but could be handy when you're writing your pipelines. A couple container D flags just for setting stuff. I know some people have actually been trying to set some of this stuff. I think there was actually a bug related to this one that I think already got fixed. This one is a really nice quality of life improvement right here that I think has been a long-standing issue for quite a while, where fly by default would always, when you do a fly intercept or hijack, as people probably historically know, doing a fly intercept, it would always try and do bash it would always try and start bash. And by default, sorry, not by default, you could tell fly intercept to also run a different command. So if you knew bash wasn't on that container that you were trying to intercept on, you could tell fly to use shell, similar to how you would do like a Docker exec or kubectl exec or Docker run as well. You would just specify, hey, run this command instead. But generally, like this was kind of a hard thing for people to figure out, especially the first time you run into it, because I think it would just say like process does not or binary does not exist, which can be kind of head scratching because it was kind of opaque. You weren't sure like, wait, what is fly trying to do? Like it wasn't obvious that, oh, I tried to start bash and I couldn't start bash. But yeah, now it'll try and if it sees that, hey, I wasn't able to find bash, I will try and fall back to shell. So it does that now, which is a nice quality of life improvement. Now this one's pretty cool. Grouping instance pipelines. And Aiden, I'm glad you jumped on Zoom here, so that way I can have you explain it and such. But this is basically an implementation of this instance pipelines RFC, and maybe I'll show what it looks like because we're already using it on our team here. So in the sidebar, you can tell if something's an instance pipeline because it's going to have this box and show you the number of instances of this pipeline that there are. So our resource one is probably our biggest usage of it. And yeah, this is basically kind of a way to group a bunch of pipelines and where they have some shared variable and you want to change that variable for every single pipeline. So the resource pipeline here, these are all the built-in resources that come with Concourse. And the pipelines for these are all structured pretty much exactly the same. We have these like PR jobs up here, these building image jobs here, and then just these 3 publish jobs. So all the pipelines, they all look exactly like that. It's all exactly the same. So of course, we were always using the same like base template for that pipeline. But before they would actually just appear, like this list would just be massive, right? Because you can imagine then all of a sudden you just have a bunch of pipelines, one called time, one called pool, one called datadog, one called get. But now this is a nice way for us to just group all of these pipelines together that are all the same and they really just differ by just this type variable. And yeah, so I know a lot of Aiden put a lot of work into like the UI work for this, and I think even like the backend stuff. I'm not sure off the top of my head who else it was, but I know Aiden's name is just littered all over all the instance group stuff, and it turned out really, really awesome so far. And yeah, if you want to actually see an example of this as well, there's also, I think we made an example one as well if you want to check. Yeah, there's like this example pipeline here as well that you can find in like the examples repo here. There's like pipelines, and then I think hidden in our set pipeline job here. And actually, this is a nice way to see how you can define instance pipelines just using the set pipeline stuff, which is also a really cool feature. But so this one up here, this is actually just a normal set pipeline, just with some variables being passed in. To make like instance group pipelines, you can see here these 2 steps right here. They both refer to the same pipeline, instance groups and then instance groups. And then they have this instance var subkey, where then they pass in a bunch of their variables. And yeah, and then it just gets interpolated and ends up looking like this on the UI. So yeah, it's a nice way of grouping pipelines together. There's a feature flag for it, so you don't get these immediately. With version 7, you have to actually set these. You have to enable that feature flag. And yeah, so that's instance pipelines. Oh, the thing moved on me here a bit when I zoomed in. That's fine. Yeah, Aiden, is there anything else you want to add actually about just instance pipelines in general that I missed?
I think you covered it pretty well. I would say the UX still needs to be worked on a bit, maybe. Just we're not sure about the terminology like instance groups. There is a page in the docs that kind of goes over how you would interact with instance pipelines through Fly and the UI a bit. So play around with it if you would like. One important thing to note is that instance pipelines, like the instance vars are both used in the pipeline as like interpolated into the pipeline YAML, as Taylor mentioned, but they're also like a part of the identifier in a way that you wouldn't be able to do before, like, because now you can have structured data to identify pipelines before you'd, I don't know, try to encode some information into the pipeline name, but especially with the identifier restrictions, that's not always possible. So this is the way to mitigate that.
Awesome. All right. Let's keep going. See what else is happening here. Oh yeah, Vault supports the KVV2 backend, so that's kind of a nice thing. People were looking for that. Adding the -- team flag to fly, which is pretty cool. Hey, Dwayne. Dwayne's in the chat. Performance improvement stuff. Oh yeah, small thing. Ensure pipelines contain at least one job, but that shouldn't affect anybody. Some set pipeline changes. Shout out to Jonesy for updating the colors and contrast, making Concourse look pretty still. Oh, this one's a pretty cool one. Experimental feature supporting peer-to-peer volume streaming. So if you're writing pipelines, you might not know this, but maybe you've stumbled across this before. Maybe you've asked a question or you've done some Googling and you've seen the answer for this. But kind of, I guess, quick high level. Basically, this might be like a pretty normal setup, right? You have some worker, there's web node, and there's some other worker. And then maybe you have a job and it creates volume A, right? And you have one step that, yeah, ran on worker one. But then maybe the next step in your build, for some reason, it actually gets scheduled to run on worker two, and it needs that volume A. So then what can end up happening is you basically, the volume basically has to take a bit of a journey going from worker one, has to go over to the web, which passes the volume over to then worker two. So there's this whole like two hop thing that basically ends up happening, right? The volume starts here and then it needs to end up on this worker two. So this two hop thing, it takes time, right? You have to stream it. So yeah, and of course the larger the volume, the longer it's going to take. So this is a cool feature that Evan Chow Lee PR'd in, where you essentially just skip the web node altogether, and you just stream it directly from one worker to another. So obviously all your workers need to be on the same local network for this to work. There's a bunch of new flags that got added for this. By default, it looks at a bunch of your network devices to figure out what the local IP address should be. If there's issues for that, I think you can change it. So yeah, it's these peer-to-peer interface name pattern and interface family. At least during testing, out of the box, it seems to work pretty well and should usually pick up the right thing. I don't know if there might be some weirdness trying to enable this in a Kubernetes cluster maybe, but it works pretty well out of the box. And I know Evan's actually looking for some feedback on if people are using it and if they're running into any issues, if it's helped improve performance and startup time for individual steps. So we can yeah, I think he started this discussion over here actually just today. I'll drop that in the chat right there. So if people are using it, give some feedback. That would be awesome, because it'd be nice to know if there's any bugs or something with it. And if you're not using it, maybe consider using it, especially if all your workers are all like locally within the same network. It can potentially be a big performance boost. So let's see, what else do we have? Adding new metrics volume streams, some new metrics for that. This one's another one from Evan Chow Lee. So chaining container placement strategies. So previously there were already a handful of container placement strategies. The default one is volume locality. There were a couple other ones like actually I'm not sure which ones were on previously or before version 7, so I'm not going to say which ones there were, but there were a few. But yeah, you could only select one, right? And yeah, this allows you to now chain a couple, so you can actually like set this container placement environment variable or use the flag instead, and you can just list out all the different placement strategies, just comma separated, And yeah, when Concourse is deciding where to put a container for a particular step, it'll essentially just go through this chain. Not sure if people have tried this and if they've come up with some pretty good chains. Those might be interesting to share with the community if people have played around with this a little bit and found a placement strategy chain that works pretty well for them. I guess also related to that were some new container placement strategies. There's like you can limit max containers, limit max volumes. These are global settings, so you can't have a different limit per worker. Though I keep thinking like that would be such a cool thing if you could do that. But the way Concourse is structured right now, it doesn't lend itself very well to do that. But either way, you can set like a global limit. So if your workers are all generally the same size, which I think it is for most people, then this could be a handy way to just make sure that your workers aren't ever falling over because Concourse throws too much at it at any one time. I would imagine the limit max containers is probably the most useful between these two, but heck, maybe you can come up with a cool way of chaining them together just to ensure that your workers are less likely to fall over. There are some other flags related to it. Oh yeah, so when you use something like limit max containers, limit max volumes, there's a separate flag that you have to configure to specify, hey, this is what the max should be per worker. Not sure what the default is off the top of my head, but I'm sure there might be some default, or it might be 0, which might mean unlimited, but I'm not sure. Maybe we can probably quickly find out. If we look at space Concourse, you can quickly find out. etc cmd command. Oh yeah, look, I was looking at this recently too. So it's already there. Container placement strategy options. I think my Go PLS is going to take a second to start up before I can jump to this, unless someone knows where the strategy options are. But I guess it's in the worker package somewhere.
Yeah, ATC worker placement.go, I think.
ATC worker placement.go. Hey, nice. Yeah. Yeah. So actually, yeah. So the default for these is 0. That's cool, which means that there is no limit. Cool. So that's the default. So you'll probably want to set these if you're using any of the limit active containers of volumes one. Otherwise, essentially, you're going to see no change in behavior, and Concourse could still accidentally knock over everything. And actually, I should probably keep this up just in case I want to come back to it again. But yeah, so that's quite a few changes with container placement strategy. A bunch of stuff that people could play around with there. Some changes to Go Concourse with error messages. Ignoring pause jobs when displaying pipeline status in the UI. Skip checking put only resource. It's another little performance improvement. Oh yeah, there's some of the changes related to instance pipelines. That also performance improvements. Fish has autocomplete now if you use Fish, which is kind of surprising because all of our team workstations use Fish, but we never had this ourselves. Some container D stuff. More optimization stuff. Allow underscores in identifiers. Oh yeah, so I guess at some point, was this in V6 actually that this landed, Alex? The restrictions in identifiers, or was that in a major version of it? Or I think we just started printing warnings, I guess, right? That's what we were doing, and I think that's still the case.
I think so, yeah. They're just warnings for now.
Yeah, just warnings. But I think there's like an RFC that's related to this as well, I believe, right? Related to the identifiers.
Yeah. There's an RFC for the identifier restrictions, which was merged a while back. And then some of the feedback that we got pretty early on was that forbidding underscores was way too hardcore. So we've relaxed that, and seems okay now.
Yeah, people aren't complaining as much about the warning now, as long as they still have their underscores. Cool. Support for mutual TLS. Oh yeah, so this one is basically if you have some reverse proxy like Nginx sitting in front of your Concourse, you can now actually have mutual TLS between the Nginx and Concourse. It doesn't have to be purely unencrypted traffic, which is nice if you're really concerned about that security stuff like that. Some login timeout stuff, or Vault's login timeout stuff. Oh yeah, I guess this is a new build metadata thing. I don't know if we've actually documented this on the website because I don't think I've seen that. If I go on here, actually, build meta. No, probably have to look at what resources, or is it? It might be an implement
If
resources.
you search expose, it would show it if it is there, but it's probably not there.
Yeah, but yeah, I believe that release note is saying it's being added to this list of build metadata that's uh, made available to resources when they run. But yeah, so I guess there's this new build created by, and it looks like you only get it if you set this expose build created by.
Yeah, I can provide some context there. The goal of this is ultimately, I think, to pass the user that triggered the build onto a resource, typically for like notifications or auditing purposes. But we didn't want to, by default, just expose the username of anyone that triggers any build to all resources. So that's why you opt into it on the resource. This might be something that is later adjusted as we figure out a better pattern for notifications and auditing and things like that. This might go away in the future, but until we have that, this is just a bit of a stopgap to make that easier.
Cool. That is handy. Oh yeah, this is a bunch of subpoints under this one actually. It's different authentication connectors populate different
yeah.
claims. Oh yeah.
This ended up being a Pandora's box.
Yes, that was a long discussion that you and Evan had to have in the PR about this. All right, we'll move along from this Pandora's box, but it's a bit complicated, I guess, obviously. Okay, allow disabling resource checking. So I think this is the thing that people were asking, especially if they just want to use only webhooks. Of course, using webhooks has its own caveats. But yeah, now you can say check every never, and Concourse will never check the resource, which, yeah, can be a handy thing to have. It will definitely help people run into like rate limiting issues. I actually like using this whenever I'm doing local development. Usually when I'm just making like a little test pipeline from with a locally Docker composed concourse. I'll usually put all my resources with check every never, so that way I don't like accidentally set a git resource and then come back 5 minutes later and GitHub is telling me like, hey, you need to like give us a private key or a token or something so you can keep pinging us. So this is a handy thing to avoid running into that issue just for local development. But yeah, this one is related to it. Yeah, adding a flag to the migrate command. So yeah, this one was motivated by something we want to do in the chart. We want to add it in a container to the chart. We wanted a way to be able to run Concourse and tell it to like, hey, connect to the database and just run all the migrations that need to be run. So just migrate to the latest version as the flag describes. So that's the thing you can do. And if you want to, I don't know, maybe add it to your own deployment process if you're not using the Helm chart, you can actually essentially just do a concourse, migrate, and then just add this flag and add in, of course, all the Postgres details it needs so it can connect to the database, and it'll connect to the database, run the migrations, and exit right after. So that can be a handy thing if you want to do the migration separately from updating the web nodes themselves. At least with the Helm chart, it ends up being a lot cleaner, especially when you do an upgrade using the Helm chart, because now you won't have all these like web nodes trying to connect, and that typically hasn't been much of an issue, but it's definitely just a lot cleaner right now, and also an issue that would happen, especially I think we had some large migrations, I think, in version 7, right, Alex?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there was like the one really long one. I can't remember what it was, but yeah, there's a super long migration, which is also what motivated this. Because the nice thing about the init containers with Kubernetes is there's no cap on like how long they run for. They just run till completion, until the process exits. So being able to do the migration outside of like the life cycle of the container itself, yeah, made it much easier and just more stable to do upgrades for Concourse and not have Kubernetes be like, hey, your web pod's taking too long because it's doing all these migrations. I'm just going to kill it, because now it happens in init container. Yeah. Oh yeah, enhanced search bar filtering. Oh yeah, this one's pretty cool. But yeah, Agent did a bunch of really cool stuff actually with the pipeline, and you can actually see. So I'm clicked into this instance group right now, and you can see it's actually filled out the search bar with all the details. So that's something that didn't happen before. So if I just go back to the home, you see the search bar gets cleared. But yeah, there's a bunch of cool stuff that it does now. Aiden, by all means, just let me know if I'm not doing it enough justice. But you can do stuff like, I thought it was tab complete, but no, down. Wait, Aiden, what am I doing wrong? Can I not tab complete it, or is that me hoping for too much?
I guess not.
No.
Yeah, just navigating it down. But yeah, basically before the suggestions were pretty dumb. It would give you the suggestions to filter by team or status if you hadn't typed anything. But as soon as you started typing, it would get rid of the suggestions. Now it does like prefix-based matching or fuzzy-based matching. Another thing this allows you to do, this was something someone had pointed out before, but previously all of the search was fuzzy matching. So if you searched for a team name that was like a part of another team name, it would show both names, even if you typed the full thing. Now you can get around this by quoting the search terms. So if you do team, whatever, like if you type team, yeah. Like if you type team M before, it would show any team that contained an M. But now if you do team quoted M, it wouldn't show anything, I guess. But yeah.
Oh yeah, like this. If I close the quote off, then it doesn't show anything. But yeah, do something like that. Yeah, and I guess also the other cool thing that I think I remember you mentioning was I think before, maybe I have this wrong, but I don't think it would like re-show like the status and team. Like it wouldn't continue suggesting stuff after you started typing stuff. I don't believe, but yeah, now you can do stuff like this, and yeah, it's up and down arrow keys, and then you just hit enter to select that item. But yeah. This is cool. Do we have anything paused? We do have some stuff paused. So yeah, that's the search bar. It's hopefully a lot more useful for people now if they want to filter stuff. And of course, I think you can see also up in the browser's URL bar, it's also filling that out. So of course, you can always just bookmark that if you wanted. If you want to get to a certain state on the dashboards, it'd be a nice way to just create one and then bookmark it and save it for later. But yeah, search suggestions are more intelligent now. Adding some tooltips, bumping baggage claim. Oh yeah, this was about having Windows workers use robocopy. I think instead they were, what was it, just calling copy before, which was slower? I forget all the details on this one, Alex.
Yeah, it was either, I think it might have even been doing like a pure Go, like native copy implementation, which was incredibly slow. But Windows comes with this robocopy command, which is a lot faster and can copy in parallel. We actually noticed this in one of our builds. They started taking like 45 minutes randomly because we introduced a task cache that had a bunch of tiny files. And this pretty much completely eliminated that additional time.
Nice. Yeah, and then a bunch of other small stuff, metrics, another database improvement thing. I guess this is a little change, allow ampersands in a var's path. Oh yeah, I guess if you were trying to like pass in an email as a variable, I guess there were some problems with that before, but that now works. So yeah, and of course various bug fixes. Don't know if there's anything major here that's worth calling out. Probably not. I'm going to jump up to 7.1, which I think is a much smaller release. I don't know if there's any big headliner features here. Oh, I guess, let's see, adjusting space padding, show warning for pipelines, compare to pipeline. Oh yeah, there's this one, which for anyone that's using the overlay driver with their workers, if you notice privileged containers are generally slow to start up. They should be faster now if you go to 7.1. There's this overlay feature called metacopy that now if we detect that you're using overlay and that feature is available on your kernel, then we will use it. And yeah, that can be a huge performance boost because it ends up like in some of the tests we did, a privileged container would take up to like 1 minute to initialize. because of all the permission changes that we'd have to do, and it just would result in overlay creating a copy of the entire volume and all the volumes that the privileged container uses. But yeah, with this now, instead of taking like many seconds, it ends up taking like just as long as a non-privileged task. So you should see like minus volume streaming that may happen. The startup time for a privileged task should be a lot faster if you're using overlay. But yeah, and I think that's pretty much all I want to cover. Unless someone else on the team has something else they want to mention related to 7 or 7.1. Also, I guess shout out to Clara. She was the release anchor for 7.0. And actually, who was the release anchor for 7? Who was that?
That was me.
That was you, Aiden. So shout out to you for anchoring that release. But yeah, I think that's it. That's all we wanted to cover. And yeah, it's like 1:50 now, so we've gone for 50 minutes. But yeah, thank you for everyone that joined and watched. This is hopefully the first of many. We're going to keep thinking of other ideas, probably stuff that might be more focused on how to do certain things in Concourse or how to configure Concourse in certain ways. But yeah, we're going to keep thinking of ideas, keep doing this stuff, and yeah, just keep interacting with all of you and keeping everyone up to date with what we're working on and what's coming down the pipeline, basically. But yeah, I guess with that, we will say bye. Thank you for watching.